sound business and friendliness among regular fellows. He was also no less an official than esteemed leading knight in the benevolent and protective order of the Elks, and it was rumored that at the next election he would be a candidate for exalted ruler. He was a jolly man, given to oratory and to chumminess with the arts. He called on the famous actors and vaudeville artists when they came to town, gave them cigars, addressed them by their first names, and sometimes succeeded in bringing them to the Booster Club lunches to give the boys a free entertainment. He was a large man with hair and brows, and he knew the latest jokes, but he played poker close to the chest. It was at his party that Babbitt had sucked in the virus of today's restlessness. Gunch shouted, "How was the old Bolshevsky? How do you feel the morning after the night before?" "Oh, boy, some head! That was a regular party you threw, Verge. Hope you haven't forgotten I took that last cute little jackpot," Babbitt bellowed. He was 3 feet from Gunch. "That's all right now. What I'll hand you next time, Georgie. Say, did you notice in the paper the way the New York Assembly stood up to the Reds?" "You bet I did. That was fine. Nice day today." "Yes, it's one mighty fine spring day, but night's still cold." "Yeah, you're right they are. Had to have a couple blankets last night out on the sleeping porch. Say, Sid," Babbitt turned to Finkelstein, the buyer, "got something I want to ask you about. I went out and bought me an electric cigar lighter for the car this noon, and—" "Good hunch," said Finkelstein, while even the learned Professor Pumperoy, a bulbous man with a pepper and salt cutaway and a pipe organ voice, commented, "That's a dandy accessory. Cigarette lighter gives tone to the dashboard." "Yep. Finally decided I'd buy me one. Got the best on the market. Clerk said it was. Paid $5 for it. Just wondering if I got stuck. What they charge for 'em at your store, Sid?" Finkelstein asserted that $5 was not too great a sum, not for a really high-class lighter which was suitably nickeled and provided with connections of the very best quality. "I always say, and believe me, I based it on a pretty fairly extensive mercantile experience, the best is the cheapest in the long run. Of course, if a fellow wants to be a Jew about it, he could get cheap junk, but in the long run, the cheapest thing is the best you can get. Now you take this the other day I got a new top from Old Boat and some upholstery, and I paid out $126.50. And of course a lot of fellows would say that was too much. Lord, if the old folks, they live in one of these hick towns upstate, and they simply can't get onto the way a city fellow's mind works. And then, of course, they're Jews, and they'd lie down and die if they knew that Sid added up 126 bones. But I don't figure I was stuck, George, not a bit. Machine looks brand new. Not that it's so darned old, of course. It's had less than 3 years, but I give it a hard service. Never drive less than 100 miles on Sunday. I really don't think you got stuck, George. In the long run, the best is, you might say, it's unquestionably the cheapest." "That's right," said Vergil Gunch. "That's the way I look at it. If a fellow is keyed up to what you might call intensive living, the way you get it here in Zenith, all the hustle and mental activity that's going on with a bunch of live wires like the Boosters and here at the ZAC, why, he's got to save his nerves by having the best." Babbitt nodded his head at every fifth word in the roaring rhythm, and the conclusion in Gunch's renowned humorous vein. He was enchanted. "Still, at that, George, don't know's you can afford it. I've heard your business is kind of under the eye of the government since you stole the tail of Eathorne Park and sold it." "Oh, you're a great little josher, Verge. But when it comes to kidding, how about this report that you stole the black marble steps off the post office and sold them for a high-grade coal?" In delight, Babbitt patted Gunch's back and stroked his arm. "That's all right. But what I want to know is who's the real estate shark that bought that coal for his apartment houses?" "I guess that'll hold you for a while, Georgie," said Finkelstein. "I'll tell you, though, boys, what I did here. George's missus went into the gents' wear department at Parcher's to buy him some collars, and before she could give his neck size, the clerk slips her some 13s. 'How's you know the size?' says Miss Babbitt. And the clerk says, 'Men that let their wives buy collars for 'em always wear 13, madam.' 'How's that?' That's pretty good, eh? How's that, eh? I guess that'll about fix you, George." "I Babbitt sought for amiable insults in answer. He stopped, stared at the door. Paul Riesling was coming in. Babbitt cried, "See you later, boys," and hastened across the lobby. He was, just then, neither the sulky child of the sleeping porch, the domestic tyrant of the breakfast table, the crafty money changer of the lighty-pretty conference, nor the blaring good fellow, the josher and regular guy of the athletic club. He was an older brother to Paul Riesling, swift to defend him, admiring him with proud, incredulous love, passing the love of women. Paul and he shook hands solemnly. They smiled as shyly as though they had been parted 3 years, not 3 days, and they said, "How's the old horse thief?" "All right, I guess. How you poor shrimp?" "I'm first rate, you second-hand hunk of cheese." Reassured thus of their fondness, Babbitt grunted, "You're a fine guy, you are. 10 minutes late." Riesling laughed. "Well, you're lucky to have a chance to have lunch with a gentleman." They grinned and went into the Norwegian washroom, where a line of men bent over the bowls insert along a prestigious slab of marble, as in religious prostration before their own images in the massy mirror. Voices, thick, satisfied, authoritative, hurled along the marble walls, bounded from the ceiling of lavender-colored milky tiles, while the lords of the city, the barons of insurance and law and fertilizers and motor tires, laid down the law for Zenith, announced that the day was warm indeed, indisputably of spring, that wages were too high and the interest on mortgages too low, that Babe Ruth, the eminent player of baseball, was a noble man, and that those two nuts at the Climax Vaudeville Theater this week certainly are a slick pair of actors. Babbitt, though ordinarily his voice was the surest and most episcopal of all, was silent in the presence of the slight, dark reticence of Paul Riesling. He was awkward. He desired to be quiet and firm and deft. The entrance lobby of the athletic club was Gothic, the washroom Roman Imperial, the lounge Spanish Mission, and the reading room in Chinese Chippendale, but the gem of the club was the dining room, the masterpiece of Ferdinand Reitman, Zenith's busiest architect. It was lofty and half-timbered, with Tudor-leaded casements, an oriel, a somewhat musicianless musician's gallery, and tapestries believed to illustrate the granting of Magna Carta. The open beams had been hand-azed by Jake Offutt's Car Body Works. The hinges were of hand-wrought iron, the waistcoat studded with hand-made wooden pegs, and at one end of the room was a heraldic and hooded stone fireplace, which the club's advertising pamphlet asserted not only to be larger than any of the fireplaces in European castles, but of a draught incomparably more scientific. It was also much cleaner, as no fire had ever been built in it. Half of the tables were mammoth slabs which seated 20 or 30 men. Babbitt usually sat at the one near the door, with a group including Gunch, Finkelstein, Professor Pumphrey, Howard Littlefield, his neighbor T. Cholmondeley Fink, the poet and advertising agent, and Orville Jones, whose laundry was in many ways the best in Zenith. They composed a club within the club. They merrily called themselves the Roughnecks. Today, as he passed their table, the Roughnecks greeted him. "Come on, sit down. You and Paul too proud to feed with poor folks? Afraid somebody might stick you for a bottle of Bevo? George, strikes me as you swells are getting awful darn exclusive." He thundered, "You bet! We can't afford to have our reps ruined by being seen with you tightwads," and guided Paul to one of the small tables beneath the musicians' gallery. He felt guilty. At the Zenith Athletic Club privacy was very bad form, but he wanted Paul to himself. That morning he had advocated lighter lunches, and now he ordered nothing but English mutton chop, radishes, peas, deep-dish apple pie, a bit of cheese, and a pot of coffee with cream, adding, as he did invariably, "And, you might give me an order of French fried potatoes." When the chop came, he vigorously peppered it and salted it. He always peppered and salted his meat, and vigorously, before tasting it. Paul and he took up the spring-like quality of the spring, the virtues of the electric cigar lighter, and the action of the New York State Assembly. It was not until Babbitt was thick and disconsolate with mutton grease that he flung out, I wound up a nice little deal